Welcome to Drumbeats, the must-listen-to podcast which explains why Indigenous partnerships are the key to securing successful outcomes in natural resource and infrastructure investment in Canada. I'm Mark McNack, and my co-host Robert Brandt and I are joined today by Brendan Bell, Chief Executive Officer of West Kitikmeot Resources Corporation. Brendan is here to discuss one of the most strategically significant infrastructures and development in northern Canada, the Grays Bay Road and Port Project, located in Nunavut. This project spans 230 kilometers and includes the construction of a deep-water port on the Arctic coastline. With an estimated cost exceeding $1 billion, it represents a major advancement for Arctic security, Canadian sovereignty, and regional economic resilience. Brendan highlights how this initiative is not merely about infrastructure, it's about transforming the high cost of living in the North, generating long-term employment, and opening up economic opportunities for remote communities. It also aligns with NATO priorities and the broader federal interest in securing Canada's Arctic frontier.
Brendan Bell, the CEO of West Kitikmeot Resources Corp. Welcome to Drumbeats. Thanks for taking the time to join us.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Mark, thanks for having me.
Welcome. Pleasure to have you on, Brendan. So perhaps, Brendan, for our listeners, why don't you tell everyone where you're from, how you end up at the place you are now, and you can also share where you are.
Sure. Well, I'm a Canadian, of course. I've spent most of my life in northern Canada, and so for your listeners and viewers, a place called the Northwest Territories. The capital of the Northwest Territories is Yellowknife. A little bit of notoriety and fame because diamonds were discovered not so long ago in the Northwest Territories. It became quite a producer on the international scene. Most of my life spent in northern Canada. I'm in British Columbia today, but our project is focused on the Arctic coast. So for listeners between Alaska in the west and Greenland, which we all well know where Greenland is these days, in the east, we're almost smack dab in the middle, in the Kitikmeot region of Nunavut. So Nunavut and the Northwest Territories used to be one territory. We're divided not so long ago, several decades ago. And now we've got effectively Northwest Territories in the west and Nunavut in the east.
Really interesting background. Imagine growing up in the north. And do you have an Indigenous background, or you just had the benefit of growing up in the north?
I don't. I'm non-Indigenous, but my family moved north first to the Eastern Arctic, to Iqaluit, which was in those days called Frobisher Bay, and then west to Yellowknife, where I grew up. I went to university in southern Canada, but my life and my career has been in northern Canada. So, a northerner.
For sure. What a special perspective you have that, most Canadians do not.
Well, look, it's a wonderful place in our country, which is, needs more eyeballs, needs more attention, needs more investment. But look, the people are the best. They're a hardy people. They're a resilient people, and look, they're proudly Canadian, and want to do their part to defend this nation and make sure that we protect our sovereignty. So it's a wonderful part of the country to be from.
And to try and put some of that in perspective, Brendan, Nunavut is, when you combine the area, is about the size of Mexico, as I understand it, but with a population of 40,000 or so.
Yeah, that's about right. Not a lot of infrastructure, a number of communities, but smaller communities. Capital in Iqaluit used to be called Frobisher Bay on Baffin Island. I'm going to probably make a mistake, but I would say it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 9,000 people these days. I lived there as a youngster before moving west to the Northwest Territories. So I was in Iqaluit between 1980 and 1983. It was much smaller in those days, but after division, it became the seat of government for the east, and it's grown immensely since then.
And the Grays Bay Road and Port project that we'll get into discussing a bit later is on the tongue of the Prime Minister, it seems, and everybody else these days because of Arctic security issues and other issues. But to step back a bit, how did you end up at West Kitikmeot Resources?
Yeah, it's a bit of a long and winding story. I'll give you a bit the abridged version, but I got into politics as a youngster after university in southern Canada. I came home, started a business, got the political bug, and ran for the territorial legislature. Eventually became mines and energy minister at a time when the Mackenzie gas project, some listeners will maybe be aware and remember the dueling pipeline debate in Canada and Alaska between Enbridge and TransCanada, who both had projects to get gas to the lower 48. I was the energy minister charged with trying to work with our groups in the Northwest Territories to advance our project. Ultimately, economics ruled, as they often do, and both projects were shelved. But it was a chance for me to really get out and get some exposure, some attention, be immersed in some of these larger resource issues. Ultimately, when I left politics, I got back into mining, and after a number of years, became the CEO of a company called Dominion Diamonds. It had been the co-discoverer of the Diavik diamond mine. We were a publicly traded company, NYSE and TSX listed. A number of our shareholders in London, and we were non-operating partner of the Diavik mine, which was operated by Rio Tinto, and we purchased the Ekati mine from BHP Billiton. So for several years, I was the CEO. Ultimately, it was taken private by the Washington family. I stayed on as an independent board director for a while, but later found was approached by the Inuit of Nunavut, Western Nunavut, and some folks in the Northwest Territories about helping them assemble some capital and a management team that would pick up some of their very interesting gold properties that just happened to be along this future infrastructure corridor. It was an opportunity I wasn't going to pass up. And so we started life as a junior explorer, looking to advance some of our gold projects, which I think your listeners will be aware don't particularly need a lot of infrastructure. And that's why gold mines and diamond mines in this part of the world have been developed. Base metal mines, for the most part, haven't. So we had gold projects in this infrastructure corridor, but within very early days, the federal government and the Kitikmeot Inuit asked us if we would become the proponent for the infrastructure project, take over effectively the federal funding, bring some of our own, and advance through permitting and design this infrastructure corridor that sees a port at Grays Bay and a road that ultimately connects to crosses the border into the Northwest Territories and down into the national highway system.
A couple of things. When did this Grays Bay project first start, when you said the federal government asked you your organization to kind of pull it all together?
We're only a couple of years into the role of proponent, but this is not a new idea, a new project. It's been on the books for decades. It's had several different routings. The last proposed approach, or the initial proposed approach, would go to a place called Bathurst Inlet, which is more inland in Nunavut, so not on the Northwest Passage. But ultimately, that was considered for a number of years. Local people were concerned about its proximity to caribou calving grounds. So the preferred routing was shifted to the west, and it is the route that we're currently permitting, which ends up at Grays Bay on the Northwest Passage. So 2 years for me, 2.5 years involved in the infrastructure project, but this is something that was first talked about in the 70s and 80s in this part of the world. Has had various different iterations, but really now finally has what we feel is some wind in sails and a good push now to get to completion and get this thing built.
So wind in the sails. What's happened? I mean, a lot's happened, but what are some of the instigators to raise Grays Bay project back up to the priority list?
Well, look, a number of not so good things. Maybe I'll take one step back and say that a number of us have been talking about these NATO commitments and Canada coming up short, and suggesting that really this lack of northern infrastructure was an opportunity if Canada would focus on investing in the north. Most of these projects have multi-user, dual purpose at least, typically mining or energy and defense or security function. So we've been making the case and trying to convince people that this would be a good objective to invest in infrastructure in this part of the world. And also, by the way, check that NATO 2% box. In many respects, we've been overtaken by events on that front. But I would say about a year ago, this became pretty interesting. Obviously, the attention now on Greenland and a recognition that Canadians, if we're serious about being a northern country, are certainly going to need to pull our weight and do more in this part of the world. So, probably the last 6 months, and certainly with the recent election, this was a key issue through the three main parties in Canada. All had Grays Bay in their platform, recognizing that this checked a number of boxes, including Indigenous ownership and leadership, ultimately a security and sovereignty function in a place that's very, very important and increasingly important with warming and climate change, and the opening up of the Northwest Passage. So, yeah, it's we are on the move now. We talked to our small employee team that it's every day a new opportunity seems to pop up, and we've got a bit of a tiger by the tail. But as the farmers say, you make hay when it's sunny, and so that's what we're attempting to do here: get as far down the track as we can, and ultimately see this project built.
Tell us a little bit about the Indigenous ownership angle to this project, and who is West Kitikmeot?
Yeah. Well, maybe let's start with the philosophy. I think early days in development in Canada, and certainly in northern Canada, there was a recognition that Indigenous involvement would be important. But if this is on a spectrum, it was off on the one end where we were talking about maybe jobs and benefits and some cash flow streams, quite far away from the notion of ownership. But in the last number of years, I think it's been recognized that if you really want to align shareholders, stakeholders, ownership is the key. And so you see this debate playing out in southern Canada with respect to pipelines that cross a number of different First Nations traditional territories. I think everybody can now understand and recognize that without ownership, these projects just won't proceed. And we felt the same way in the north for probably longer. We tend to lead on these issues. Probably for reasons, ranging from the fact that Indigenous people in Nunavut are more than 50, certainly almost 80%, I think, of the population. In the Northwest Territories, it's more like 50%. But certainly they have a lot of influence. They have a lot of influence politically, and it's long been recognized that they are the owners of the land and should be the owners of these and developers of these projects. So it's not as if this had to occur to us in the last several years as it's become a topic of lots of discussion. We've understood this for an awfully long time. So when I was CEO of Dominion Diamonds, we had a number of relationships with impacted groups in the region, one of which were the Kitikmeot Inuit, who are up north of the mine and on the coast. They provided a number of employees, saw a revenue stream, saw their businesses put to use and to work at the mine. But always I had the belief that if we were going to take this to the next step, Indigenous ownership was the requirement. And that was sort of the deal that got me back involved in mineral exploration. I wasn't sure that I would come back to that, but the fact that the Kitikmeot Inuit wanted to advance their own vehicle, recognized that they'd missed out on a number of opportunities over the years, wanted to maintain a healthy ownership, recognized in raising money there would be some dilution, but a healthy, chunky ownership in this project is key for moving it forward, and that's what we've set out to do and achieve. So back to that question, I probably should let viewers know there's a public government in Nunavut. And in the legislature in Iqaluit, most of the members of the Legislative Assembly are Inuit, but there's also an Inuit level of governance that stems out of the land claim. There are regional Inuit authorities, 3 of them in Nunavut, and we belong to the westernmost group, the Kitikmeot. So west east it goes Kitikmeot, Kivalliq, and then into the Baffin for the easternmost people in the territory. And so the Kitikmeot Inuit are effectively our largest shareholder through a vehicle that they've created. So the Regional Inuit Authority, or the people of the Kitikmeot region, own the largest chunk of West Kitikmeot Resources.
What sort of investment to bring Grays Bay Road and Port Project to fruition are you looking at?
Yeah, so that's a great question with probably still more questions than answers at this point. As you know, we're in the middle of permitting and design, doing a lot of scoping work. And so I can tell you that in the past, there has been a scope and a budget put to this project, with probably at that point, 2018 dollars. If we take our project, which again is just a port on the Northwest Passage and a road 230 kilometers to a place called Jericho Station, it would then be connected into the Northwest Territories. So let's call this the northern phase. We believe that's north of $1 billion Canadian. and depending on the scope and the requirements that the military or the Coast Guard might have, could be more than that. But at a minimum, we're talking about a $1 billion Canadian investment for the northern portion, and several billion to get all the way to the national highway system down, connecting to the capital of the Northwest Territories in Yellowknife. This is an awfully long and large part of the world, as you pointed out at the outset. Hundreds of kilometers to get from Grays Bay to the national highway system, and the cost to build in terms of a kilometer of construction for an all season road, with the kind of grade where caribou are able to cross effortlessly, it's probably these days $3 million Canadian a kilometer on fairly flat terrain, but it's an expensive part of the world, a remote part of the world to construct and build. So the numbers get a little striking and incredible, really, when you think about it. But that's the cost of doing business in this part of the world.
The engineering challenges of building in that part of the world, Brendan, are those?
Yeah, I mean, for your listeners and viewers who are familiar with seeing the footage of pipelines going west in Canada through the Rockies or through these mountain ranges out to the west coast, we don't have those same sorts of challenges going north to south. We're not crossing mountain ranges, but we certainly deal with a shifting permafrost regime and sensitivity around caribou migration. And so the roads need to be built relatively flat without steep embankments. We need to use relatively small crush so that the caribou are able to cross without injuring themselves. And so there are a number of design considerations that raise the cost, but this is just absolutely a must do for us. So I would say that the larger consideration is permafrost. Lots of water crossings as well to get on the most direct route to the Arctic coast. And then at the port, different considerations, but it is naturally a deep water harbor, which is why Grays Bay was chosen. There are very few of them, ironically, on the Arctic coast in this part of the world. Some are attached and on islands that don't attach to the mainland, so they're not as desirable. So it's one of a few naturally endowed deep water harbors. Would not really require dredging to be able to accommodate the wharf design that we proposed. That would be able to receive the largest ships in the Canadian Navy, for instance, and large size post-Panamax bulkers that would move ore concentrate. So the natural endowment is really the key in terms of deep water and the ability to put ports here. But it doesn't mean that it's not expensive. It will certainly be.
Right. And just coming back to the description of the deep water port, you talked about the Canadian Navy, which at the end of World War II was third or fourth largest in the world. Today, obviously, not so much. What other type of can it become a significant defense outpost in terms of the North American defense or NATO? Would it be seen as an important deep water port for that, or not so much?
Well, no, certainly it could be. I mean, as I say, there really aren't naval installations in this part of the world. For one thing, there certainly aren't any that connect to the national highway system. So it's got all kinds of potential. It will really depend on D&D, on the Prime Minister, on security users to design exactly what they think the functionality should be. We're anticipating, look, it's well known that Canada intends to purchase 12 submarines. Diesel electric subs, which would need to be able to tuck in here, one would presume. There's nowhere else on the Arctic coast that they would visit. So it's an awfully long way in Canada from Esquimalt on the west coast all the way up around Alaska down to Halifax. Somewhere in the middle seems like a logical place to tuck into, and we think that's Grays Bay. So about the only thing that you might not be able to bring in for ice reasons, even without the ice, for reasons of being able to park because they're too big, would be large aircraft carriers. Everything else could be accommodated. So I think it'd be an awfully long time before there's enough of an ice-free season that you'd bring aircraft carriers into this part of the world. But everything short of that can dock here.
And when you talk about security, what are other Arctic countries doing in this area? Are others building ports, whether friends or foes?
Yeah, well, look, that's a great question. The people who've really driven this bulking up of infrastructure are of course the Russians. And to look at a circumpolar map and to see the dots of assets A number of ththese assets are being dusted off and refurbished post Cold War here, where they were closed down. So the real activity and the development of things like ice-breaking LNG ships, that's all been on the Russian side. We're seeing it now in Scandinavia. There's a bit of a scramble. Expect more activity, I believe, in Greenland. And so, there's a bit of a race going on here, but certainly the Russians have been in the lead. And these near Arctic states are so-called aspirational near Arctic states like China certainly have developed ships that can make it through the Northwest Passage, and they're keen to get them out on tests. So, yeah,
nuclear icebreakers. Have
right.
seen those? Mm-hmm.
That's right. Yeah. And look, I think the other thing that's coming that nobody's really, we're starting to think about, but the Paul Martin government in Canada a number of years ago made the decision that we were not going to house ICBM interception sites on Canadian soil. I think that was the Canadian mood at the time, despite all the other NATO countries accommodating that functionality. I think probably we're going to have to revisit that. I imagine that will be revisited, and these are the kinds of places that might be able to accommodate some of those interception sites in future. Again, look, impossible for me to know what the government will decide makes sense for some of these sites, but if I was in government, I would not be looking to build greenfield sites for that functionality. If I had, effectively mines that were closing down and could be taken over, if I had ports like Grays Bay that were being stood up, you'd think you would want to make the best use of money and build some of that functionality in. But nobody has had that conversation with us. We don't have a crystal ball. We're just imagining where this might go in future.
How long do you think we'll have to wait before we get some direction from the federal government? The new government have said they want to identify nation-building projects to prioritize, and we've all been waiting to see which projects they identify. How long do you think we'll be waiting for that?
Well, there's what we can see going on publicly with the narrative that there's a list and it's an ever evolving list and projects will come on and come off. And I think that's probably right, but I've got to believe that there's a list already that's been approved. I think in terms of when that information becomes public, expect, I think, this summer. Anticipate that it probably happens before August. We've got a bit of a 30-day clock, as you're well aware, between Canada and the U.S. here in terms of a discussion and an agreement. At least, the construct for an agreement, I believe, between Canada and the U.S. on trade and security issues. I would not be surprised to see some of these Arctic projects and even border projects identified specifically in an agreement. Now, maybe that's too ambitious or too soon. Let's see, but I really don't think we're going to be waiting here months. I think we're talking weeks before we get some sort of an indication.
Wow, wouldn't that be great? That's the way to do infrastructure projects.
Yeah, look, and the political intention and the designation and the acknowledgement is one thing. Moving through the permitting and the design in the way that it needs to be done in a respectful manner. I think that takes a little longer. Obviously, there's an effort to try to streamline projects, and something that we're keenly aware of. It's not been attempted in the north, but truly, when we talk about 2 years or less to permit a project, effectively, we really started this a year ago, and we probably have less or maybe 2 years left to permit this project in any event. So then it becomes about the financial commitments, what we refer to as offtake. So if you can imagine the security users like D&D or the Coast Guard providing a lease commitment effectively to use the port, we can take that to equity owners. We could take that to debt providers and finance the project. So those are the key steps for us. I'm more focused, quite honestly, on those financial steps than we are on the permitting, given that we've got Indigenous ownership and this was a project conceived of and designed by the Inuit people of the region. We think ultimately it gets through that hurdle, but it's the finance that is more of an issue for us in the immediate term.
Today, how far out are you fully funded?
We raised $21 million in grant from the federal government and had to match that, or had to provide a 25% match. So effectively, we've got $30 million we're working with that will get us through this initial stage of permitting. But we're currently applying for additional funding to get us really effectively almost up to pre-construction activities. So, that would be on the current path, construction in 2030. So there may be some things that can be trimmed from that in terms of timeline, but we are funded for the next year and a half at this point, and are currently applying for more federal government to take us to the next step.
I think you've got some experience with international finance, but can you see in your future a need to reach out beyond Canada for funding and for partners?
Well, look, I absolutely believe that we will. Certainly, and these days it feels very safe to be in Europe, to be in the UK, having those sorts of conversations. Maybe it's a little trickier, south of the border at the moment, and we certainly are not looking to Asia. So it will be Canada and a European focus with respect to finance on this project anyway at this moment in time.
It's really interesting, just the change in focus, and you're from the north, right? And most Canadians don't talk about North and South Canada, sadly. But now all these conversations, when you're talking about, in the north versus, in the south of Canada, it reminds me a bit of being here in the UK when they have the road M1 going north up to Scotland. And I think that will start to change in Canada and just people's perspective of Canada, because for too long it's been about, the 90% of the population living within 100 miles of the US border. And now there's this whole undiscovered, unknown to outsiders opportunity that Canada presents. And for the nature of Nunavut and Northwest Territories and the agreements that have been set there, it will be driven by the Indigenous people.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think most Canadians, if you ask them, would identify as a polar nation. And yet most Canadians live, as you say, within 100 miles of the U.S. border and have probably never visited Northern Canada. Now, there are a number of very good reasons for that. I mean, it's incredibly expensive. I come back to the lack of infrastructure, but flights, even from Edmonton to Yellowknife, or flights from Ottawa to the capital of Nunavut, to Iqaluit, or even out west in the Yukon, when you talk about Vancouver to Whitehorse, these are incredibly expensive. And so if you want to take your summer vacation, it's impossible to drive to Nunavut. So you're talking about packing up your family of four and spending a couple of $1,000s each on airfares. Look, you can get to the UK for cheaper, oftentimes from Toronto or Vancouver, than you can to the north. And so I think that keeps a lot of Canadians from visiting. Hopefully that's changing. And I think Canadians now that certainly recognize that, given the discussion around NATO, the focus has been put on Greenland, that we need to do our share. We need to collectively, as a country, put our shoulder to the wheel and get serious about sovereignty and security in the Arctic. And so I think that this is a genie that's out of the bottle now. I don't think there's any putting it back in. If we get a shift in the South, in the U.S. in terms of tone, even after future elections, I think Canadians now, the light has gone on. We need to do more. We need to invest in infrastructure for the people who live in the North, but for our Canadian sovereignty as well.
Yeah, and beyond just Arctic security issues, Brendan, talk a little bit about what infrastructure, what kind of change would that mean for the Inuit in Nunavut and Northwest Territories?
Well, I think there are several things that people in communities throughout the North are focused on. Cost of living is always top of mind. It's incredibly expensive. Again, this is about the infrastructure gap. And so, to the extent that we develop ports that allow large ocean-going vessels to come in, even if barges need to be broken down from there, rather than flying some of these things in annually, which will still be required, you think about the ability to change the cost structure of just carrying out your daily life in the North. That's very important. This will also open up and make real, I think, some of these base metal, critical minerals mines in this part of the world. There are some world-class assets that just have no hope of being developed until they have access to tidewater. And so for these small communities, that's employment. I mean, that's economic development. So I would say cost of living, job opportunities, those are really the key drivers for Northern people in terms of their interests. They historically lived traditional lifestyles on the land. Were able to provide for themselves, hunting and fishing. They're still interested in doing that, and they still do that. But there's a recognition that younger people are also going to want to be employed in future and need economic and employment opportunities closer to home. So projects like this are not the silver bullet necessarily, but check a number of boxes and help to provide solutions for local communities. So they are, they're eagerly awaited, I would say.
Well, that is a really upbeat assessment of everything that's going on in the North. And I think that just demonstrates again the transformative opportunity that it's in front of Canada, Canadians, and foreign investors who are looking at investing in a country that doesn't have political risk, right? But these emerging market opportunities, some of our past guests have talked about.
Yeah, look, I think it's an incredible opportunity. We don't have the same sort of risks that you would find in other emerging markets. Now, that's not to suggest that there aren't issues that we need to handle very, very carefully. We principally environment. We spoke about that. Certainly, when you're building a port in a sensitive part of the Arctic, there are marine mammals to be considered. We are designing. There will be operational requirements to mitigate against any impacts on marine mammals. The same goes for if mines are developed, copper zinc mines in the neighborhood are developed, they will certainly need to shut down if there are caribou migrating through the area. So these are the kinds of challenges that we're dealing with. Design is all important. How you operate is important. But again, we take our direction from our board of directors, our largest shareholder, the Kitikmeot Inuit. We don't have to ask to understand that how we design and dealing with caribou and dealing with marine mammals is absolutely the most important and fundamental consideration. So as long as we get it right on that front, I think it's an incredible opportunity. We are across that, aware of that, and seized with that. So the kinds of challenges that you have in other parts of the world we don't have, but we have our own challenges.
And I think, Brendan, when international investors in particular look at investment opportunities and they think about Canada and they think about what types of risks or challenges and question whether there's local support or not, a project like the one you're talking about in the North doesn't get off the ground without local support. You wouldn't be sitting here talking about a project like this without the entire community supportive and your organization owned and operated by.
Yeah, Rob, I think on a number of levels, right from the design and the aspirational discussions decades ago about a road and port through the Arctic, the fact that the Inuit people of the region determined that the initial chosen route, which was better for industry, was not their preferred route, so it was moved. Our ownership is Inuit, and I think politically you've had the premier of the Northwest of Nunavut working with the regional leaders, with the president of NTI, to get the ear of the prime minister. His first visit after the election, as you know, was to Europe, but then immediately after he landed in Iqaluit, had discussion with these leaders about their priorities, their infrastructure priorities. And I've said before, there's very little daylight between these Inuit leaders on their priorities, and this is certainly top. And so that makes it a lot easier, not easy, I won't suggest, but a lot easier for the prime minister to advance projects where there is that sort of unanimous support and consensus. It really is a game changer in terms of being able to advance these projects.
Well, I know that you're a man in demand these days, and as I mentioned earlier, the prime minister, when asked about likely or possible projects or the types of projects that might get prioritized, he seems to always mention Grays Bay. So we really appreciate you taking time out to talk about West Kitikmeot and the Grays Bay project. And we wish you all the best. And we'll be watching closely in the coming months.
Rob, Mark, thanks for giving me the time to speak to your audience. And look, I extend the invitation. I think it's a wonderful place to visit. Lots of daily flights, as you know, and I think your listeners will know, from London to Toronto and to Vancouver, and then from there on, flights up to the northern part of Canada. We'd love to see you. Love to have you come and visit. I think there are incredible investment opportunities around infrastructure, around mining, around energy, and certainly I'd love to come back and talk about some of those other things that are on the horizon, because I think this is just going to be an area that's going to really take off here in the next number of years and provide great opportunity for investment.
Well, thank you. Can't wait to get there, and can't wait to speak with you again. And hopefully, you'll be at next year's summit next April back at the London Stock Exchange. It's been absolutely wonderful to hear from a Northern Canadian about how we truly become a polar nation. So, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. I hear nothing but great things about your event in London. It sounds like it's a must attend, and so I'll certainly be there. Thank you for the invitation.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you to Brendan Bell for sharing his insights with us, and thank you for viewing and listening. Be sure to share, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite podcast channel. Thanks for listening to Drumbeats. Until next time.